TAAL continues to broaden its scope and impact on the blockchain world. The company recently had a major presence at the CoinGeek conference in Dubai and is wrapping up a very busy first half of 2022. I'm Adrian Bridgebassi, a member of the TAAL team, and joining me for this edition of TAAL Talks is CEO Richard Baker. Richard, good to see you again. You've been on the go, as always.
Hi, Adrian. Yes, I have. Really good to see you. Yeah, feet haven't touched the ground for quite a few weeks.
Well, you were in Dubai with a number of members of the team. What were the highlights of the CoinGeek conference?
Yeah, real pleasure to be there, Adrian. Obviously, my first year with the company, and that was my first, BSV corporate event, and a really tremendous experience, actually. So I think, where do you start? Attendance really high. Brilliant to see so many people back face to face and enjoying each other's companies. And that was probably one of the things that really stood out for me, was the openness and the camaraderie and the collaboration that was happening around the whole event. So that was just delightful to see. The other big thing I think that struck me was the maturity now of so many companies within the ecosystem. The stage presentations by so many leaders were just fantastic. The demos were really high caliber, and the conversations that went on between wallet providers and IoT companies and the healthcare companies and ourselves, and it was really quite inspiring.
Indication of the robustness that we're seeing in the ecosystem, and that growth, as you mentioned, of going from kind of an R&D space to something with some real value to the world, where economies come into play and utility value, as we always speak about.
Exactly right. Yeah, and you could really see the utility value, and always a great testament, I think, is a lot of the young companies that have been building over the last few years turned up with customers. So it wasn't anymore that they were presenting on stage their product roadmaps and what is coming. It was actually they were stood with customers saying, well, this is what we've launched and this is how we're using it, and the customer was providing the endorsement, which is a real mark of maturity in my mind.
Absolutely. And maybe quickly, what does for these companies, where does TAAL fit into that?
Yeah, so obviously, a lot of these are application and service building companies. They're focused on different industry verticals. And in all cases, we are their partner for transaction processing and services that are linked to that transaction processing. And I think that was the really great opportunity as well through the conference, was to sit down with so many of our customers and the leaders and go through, okay, how are we doing on providing TAAL console and the API services, a number of conversations around really the future of the node software. And in many cases, there's a roadmap there for TAAL to run the node for a lot of clients and take that heavy lifting off their balance sheets and off their service stacks, all the way through to, the things that get me excited really, Adrian, which is we talked a lot about the original vision of the Bitcoin protocol, which is, of course, to bring to market this digital cash system. And we talked to many, many partners about UTXO services and payment channel services. And it helped me and the TAAL product team really shape some of our priorities going into the second half of this year. So, yeah, kind of endorsed really our excitement about what the ecosystem's doing and provided some clarity around what we should really be focusing on.
Web3, want to switch topics, switch gears here and talk about Web3. So it's a term that's becoming more and more common. For those maybe not familiar with it, can you define what it means and how, our ecosystem with BSV plays a role in that?
Yeah, you're right. I think there isn't an event you don't go to now without Web3 being referred to. Obviously, generically, I think it's being referred to as the next build phase of the internet. But I think uniquely in this phase, it's really very much about a shift in dynamics, firstly, for data ownership. And so I think with the internet as it currently stands, coupled with blockchain technology, we now see the opportunity to readdress the balance of individuals owning their own data. And so for me, a very, very big and significant definition of Web3 and how it brings about a new ecosystem is firstly the reversal of walled garden service providers owning all of my data, and that's all very fragmented today. And it means that individuals will own their own data in a Web3 wallet. And in that wallet, I will have onboarded myself. I will have gone through, know your customer and AML checks to prove my identity. But now embedded in that wallet is the concept of the private public key relationship. And my private key can now authenticate me through an interaction with public key linked to a service provider. So if I want to sign up to a music service, if I want to move to a multiple different streaming TV services, or if I want to authenticate myself to a car rental service, I will use my Web3 wallet to authenticate myself in and out of those different service environments. And so that gives rise to the next big concept, which is I own my data, I'm authenticating myself, and therefore I'm in control of who I'm permissioning that provides me services. And that gives this freedom of portability through ecosystems. And so for me, I've stayed away from the technology explanation there as best I can. I want to focus on the service attributes and what's in it for us as consumers.
So from a consumer perspective, then, what are some of the barriers to get consumers to adopt that authentication as a user, as part of your habitual touch points with any device or any website?
So I guess we're probably still in the midst of the journey towards Web3 as an overall service architecture, really, Adrian. And so comes with that we probably have to accept that we're in a bit of a hybrid market for a period of time. So if I just stick with the concept of I have a wallet, that wallet is ultimately just an application running on my mobile phone. But the capability of that wallet is ultimately linked to these authentication services in and out of different service channels. And so with that, the first tackle really is, are there sufficient standards behind the protocols that are ultimately running Web3 services? And so we're seeing a lot of work around the world on Web3 standards. And so these are coming through IP forums, these are coming through various standards bodies where they impact on different industries. I think the next hurdle challenge is this environment of how I am checked for money laundering and checked for KYC when I'm onboarding to a banking service or I'm sharing my passport to prove my identity. And I think for a period of time, that's going to be a hybrid environment where it's still trusted parties in the current world that are being used to help us build our identities into the Web3 world. But ultimately, as we settle more and more in Web3 wallets that have got proven identities, we move on very quickly from that point, in my mind, where really once those identities are trusted, it means I can onboard myself really quickly to new services without needing to go through the AML, KYC, hand over the passport. And what's the importance of this to consumers? Well, it removes security risk for every individual. Identity theft, security around authenticating for services just improves. And I think this is a still, somewhere between a 3 and maybe 8 year journey as we step through those stepping stones to bring those services to life.
Going back to BSV's original Bitcoin, it was, I think the advantage is that it was meant to do this, right? Part of that role is to create this level of ownership of data, among other things.
It was indeed, yeah. And I think, without getting too deep into it, but obviously we've seen a very distorted journey from the original Bitcoin protocol, multiple forks just on the Bitcoin protocol itself. But more relevant, I guess, is that we've seen alternative blockchains being built, the Ethereums, the Polkadots, the Cardonos. And a lot of the newer chains are ultimately side chains, they're layer 2 chains is the common referral. And effectively, they have introduced by accident almost, because their intent is to try and solve scaling, but ultimately they've introduced a security flaw in the network. You're now running a side chain on top of an Ethereum network, and we've seen too many security breaches around these side chains over the last 6 to 12 months. So fundamentally, we've got to go back to basics. Inherently, you need a layer 0 blockchain functioning, and that is the Bitcoin protocol. And that protocol can support, through good security, the building of the applications that are going on in those other networks. But it must be functioning more natively in order to protect the consumer in the long term.
Right, and in order for it to work, you need that volume of transaction processing and data capacity that TAAL has. Essentially allowing that plumbing for Web3 as you envision it to work. Is that right?
That's right, Adrian. Yeah, and TAAL is ultimately a service provider for those transaction processing services. I think we often talk about transaction processing and just thinking about it as the data packets that we're ultimately forming into blocks as we form blocks. But those transaction processing services are actually more akin to how a private public key will work in a Web3 environment, how digital cash will function. How do I actually spend my Satoshis? And in my wallet, I'm expecting to be able to interchange different tokens as I go in and out of different service environments, different retail environments. And so our role is ultimately to be the service provider for that Web3 environment. That's very much what TAAL's vision is.
And let's expand a little bit more on the digital cash and that concept, and how do you see that evolving from where we're at now to maybe where we will be, say, a year from now?
Yeah, I think fundamentally we're in the fundamental build stage of a digital cash system. Digital cash means many things to many people on the planet at the moment. We are really excited to see over 100 nations now launching central bank digital currencies. And so as we see, those 100 nations move into their sandboxes and start to roll out digital cash, that's one incarnation of a digital cash strategy, Adrian. More closer to home, we obviously see an abundance of wallet providers now building on BSV. And those wallet providers are allowing you to house your cryptocurrency, your US dollar or your sterling or your euro, and you're getting really good payment rails services behind those wallets. So you can, exchange in and out of tokens, in and out of fiat currencies really elegantly. And so, again, that's a retail-centric strategy that we're seeing. And it's those services that are getting adoption in gaming, those services that are getting adoption in music, in how NFT platforms are working. And so I think we're going to see a big rise in the near term on those type of Web3 multi-signature wallets that have got great payment rails. And in parallel, slightly slower, we're going to see the rise of digital cash through the central bank digital currencies, the wholesale markets, and really thinking from a treasury long term. So we're on a journey that isn't going to reverse now.